Well, welcome everybody to the Kennedy Center for our Ask Me Anything on Tech Careers for Kennedy Center students. We're really glad that you're here. We're also appreciative of our 3 Kennedy Center International Relations alumni who are here to speak about tech careers and plant some seeds and hopefully help you think about career paths that may not be obvious to Kennedy Center folks, but that are well represented among our alumni, College of Family Home Social Sciences and Humanities, as well as other places across campus. So just by way of announcement, we do have AMAs regularly throughout the semester. They pop up like this. So if you're not following us on our Instagram channel, or you're not signed up for the monthly email, or you're not a Kennedy Center major or minor, you can go to our website anytime. There will be other upcoming AMAs regularly, so we hope to see you back. Typically at AMAs, we do them off the record, but we are going to record this one today just so we have a record of this, because this is kind of a unique one. We don't talk about tech a lot, and I just want to personally thank our 3 alumni for doing this, because it's helping us kind of restart that conversation on campus that we need to have more here in the Kennedy Center. I'm just going to do a little one-line introduction, and then they're going to talk about their experiences, and also we'll have time for your questions. So you'll be able to shape kind of the conversation of other things that you want to learn about or that's interesting to you. So first of all, I'm going to go in reverse. We'll go across here. But Nathan Metcalf, who really we thank him for the reason that we're here today. He instigated this and reached out and offered to assemble a group, and we're so excited for that. You can read his bio, which is hilarious, and I think every student will relate to this, especially those of you who are seniors that are falling into the black hole of what I'm going to do when I graduate, and you're not sure if you really want to go to law school, and the State Department hasn't called you back, and you're thinking, what else can I do that's really interesting and global and meaningful? But he has worked with Adobe, but is currently working with Microsoft, working on finances with their marketing advertising agency supplies. I can talk a little bit about what that means. CC Messick next, another Kennedy Center graduate who has a really interesting story. If you go to the Kennedy Center's Vimeo page, you can see a little video that we made about her internship in China that turned into a job in China that was really quite remarkable, and then that led her on to get an MBA later at Wharton. She has been a product manager at Apple and Google and currently works for Google Search. And then last but not least on my right, Tim Hong, who graduated from the Kennedy Center, also in International Relations, received an MBA from BYU, and is currently working for Adobe, another local big tech firm that people hear about and see around Point of the Mountain, but maybe don't understand. So you're in for a treat, some information that I don't know where else you can get it tailored for our students in this way. I'm going to probably give you guys the remote, but why don't you join me in welcoming our panel today.
I can go first. Is this on?
Probably not.
Do we need these if it's intermittent?
Can you hear me? Yes, you can. All right, so thank you for the introduction. Nathan Metcalf is my name. I am from the Los Angeles area. So if you're from there, let's chat after, because that's a pretty great place. A little bit about from when I was in your seats right now to now my seat. So I was an international relations major. I graduated in 2010. But before I was an IR major, I thought I wanted to be a finance major. So just know in my intro, as alluded, my career is just riddled with a series of rejections and failures. So just know that no failure is permanent. And a lot of times, if you guys think of Elder Holland's talk about the 2 roads, there's so many times I've been at forks in my road and I thought I wanted a thing or thought that was my path. And either it was too chicken to go down that path, or finally I did something about it, found out where the dead end was, and then I knew that I can go the other path. So applied, took all the finance prereqs and was getting a bunch of B- and Bs. I was like, I'm not going to get in. What's something really close to this? Study, and then I got into the international relations program. Loved it. Had an internship while I was here, so I'd say come to all these info sessions. I had an awesome internship in Nicaragua because of one of these. And then in 2010, the job market was horrendous, so it took me probably 7 or 8 months to even get a job after I graduated. So if you are graduating and don't have anything in the hopper, don't worry about it too much. It'll all work out. Eventually got a job working at a small aerospace company in Springville, so not IR related, not anything really related to what I thought I would do, but started there, built up some skills, and then eventually got a job at Adobe, and that sent me out to the Bay Area in doing a lot of purchasing and procurement. So really just helping spend the company's money, which is awesome. And there's a lot of different teams, a lot of companies. Worked there for about 6 years. Most of that was in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. You'll hear us talk about that. Highly recommend, highly worth considering. And then eventually got a job with Microsoft. So I currently live here for the time being, and will probably move away to a different place, but still work in procurement and still put to use a lot of the skills and things that I learned as an IR student. But so many of the things, the timing didn't always work out to when I got a job in tech or even a job here or moving to places that I wanted. So just keep failing repeatedly, and eventually I think you'll figure out what is best for you and what will work for you. So that's, and amidst all that, I am up here, I'm the least educated, so I'm not a master. I also applied to a handful of MBA programs, including BYU's, and they didn't want me. And so just know that even if you don't have a master's degree, there's a future for you in tech or probably the industry that you want to get into. So just know, like, stick with it. It's going to work out. Maybe you'll be at a table like me 15 years later, trying to reach back out to fellow Cougar alumni and help out. So I'll stop there.
I love that. I think that's quite inspirational that you kept going. Hi, I'm Cece. I was born and raised in Hong Kong. Actually, I wanted to do a quick poll of the room. Like, how many of you are IR majors or like Kennedy Center majors? Okay, a handful. How many of you are thinking of law school or have thought about law school afterwards? Okay, so like, I saw like a little pinch. Okay. Or how many of you want to go into government or foreign service? Okay, so this side of the room is more traditional Kennedy Center. What is this side of the room?
I'm the career director for the Kennedy Center.
So you're like, I've got a job. Okay.
I'm a pre-med major, but I just figured I'd come and check this out.
Cool. I love that. Okay, awesome.
I'm Tim's wife.
That's a great reason. Okay.
I'm a social worker, so.
Okay, cool. The reason why I was asking is because, like, when I was an IR student, my full plan was I was going to go to law school, and then I was going to go to foreign service. So, like, that was exactly my plan. And in my senior year, well, like junior to senior year, I went on a Model United Nations kind of trip, sat next to one of the MUN directors who was a lawyer by day, and he was the one who convinced me to not go to law school because he told me he was miserable. But that's to say, my sister's in law school right now. She's also an IR major, so I'm not saying law school is bad. I'm just saying that's kind of how I decided. It gave me enough pause of like, oh, why don't I take a year off after graduation to like try something different while I figure out if I want to go to law school. So I even did the whole LSAT and like everything. And so that's kind of how I ended up at like a social impact tech startup in China. And that ended up being a fantastic like experience. I was there for 4 years, and then I ended up going to Wharton for my MBA. And then ended up going to Apple and Google afterwards, like Corey mentioned. Incidentally, what's fun right now is at Google, I'm actually working on building our election experience on Google search. So even right now, when you go on google.com and you search like how to vote or how to register to vote, and a little bit where you're looking up like on election night, looking up like the election results and you see all the election map, like that's what I work on. And so it's really fun to have the interaction of like the politics and the tech. And so just to also throw that out there as a possibility, it's not just like politics or tech. It's like there's a lot of really interesting intersections. But yeah, happy to talk about kind of like also how I lucked into that path, but like also being more like intentional about how to like think about a career in tech. Because when I was in Kennedy Center as an undergrad, I never even took a class in the Marriott Center because I thought the capitalists were going to like suck my soul, you know? Like I was like, I'm not going to go near the Marriott school. So like, I think it's really normal to find tech or business as like very different than what Kennedy Center is teaching you. And I think that's why, we're pretty passionate about like sharing that there is another awesome life outside of government or law school, which are also both awesome. So we're happy to chat more about that.
Sure. I'm Tim Hong. So I graduated in 1995 from Kennedy Center, so a long time ago. And then I went and did an MBA at BYU right after that. So don't always recommend going straight to MBA school because they want you to have some experience in between. It actually worked out for me. I was really interested in, back then tech was a new thing. So the first job I got was at Dell Computers in Austin, Texas, and I was really fascinated by technology. Back then, Dell was the first company to have something, one of the first companies you could customize something online, like you could buy a computer online. And so a lot of the companies and governments around the world were coming to Dell's like, how could we take more of our business online? So I got into that, and that got me into what we call partnerships in the tech world. So she's got a great slide that kind of talks about what are some different jobs in technology. So I've been in what we call like a strategic alliance manager or something, a title, something like that, where I'm managing, relationships with companies around the globe that work with Adobe. And so it's been fascinating for me. I've had the chance pre-pandemic. We were talking about that pre-pandemic. There was a lot more international travel. So I had a chance to work with partners in Israel and France and in Thailand. And so it's been really interesting kind of having that international relations piece of it. But yeah, that's me. My daughter graduated from BYU with the Kennedy Center degree as well. So she got into journalism, which was kind of different too. So there's definitely a lot of ways to go. And then our second daughter is currently at law school. So she's in her third year at law school. So it's kind of interesting to see the kids start to try to make those decisions as well about their careers. So.
And we want to give you guys the most of the time and let you guide where you want these conversations to go. We did have a couple slides that might set up some guideposts of, again, talking about roles in tech or what does Silicon Valley mean type of content. So maybe we can start there and speak to some of those things. But if you have questions, raise your hand and jump in, especially if those were questions that you were going to ask already. So
Maybe I'll stand up because I can't
go for
really
it.
see.
It's kind of
Can I just grab this? All right, I'll scoot right next to you then. Okay, so we've shared a little bit about our story. Maybe some of you are thinking this, like, I'm not a techie person. I'm not an engineer. Like, what the heck would I even do in tech? Like, we get that question a lot. Or this is my favorite. I overheard this. This was back in 2015. But somebody was like walking in front of me was like, I don't know if I want to go into tech. It feels like everything's been invented already, and I obviously a lot more tech has been invented since 2015. And this is probably like a really pertinent question right now. It's like, would I get laid off right away if I get into tech? Because right now you're probably hearing a lot about layoffs. So this is a more intimate group, which is awesome. So we're happy to answer questions, and we're getting really intimate. Then maybe we'll stop the recording. I'm just kidding. But like, so the three of us figured like maybe it would be helpful for us to just like lay the ground a little bit to talk about like when we say get into tech, what does that even mean? So for example, if you're going to med school, like actually one of my sister teams, like we build like the health experience on Google search, and a lot of them were former doctors. And so it's really interesting to think about like, I think when people think tech, they think engineers, and we're really here to talk about like people outside of engineering. So let's first start thinking about like what are some of the roles in tech, and these are not comprehensive, but just to like lay the groundwork. So traditionally, everybody knows are software engineers, right? And then there's product manager, which is what I am, and I love being a product manager. People always describe being product manager as being the CEO of your product, which means, on some days I get to like figure out the strategy and the vision and really like talk to a lot of our VPs about like what we're building. And then on the other days I'm like getting really geeky and nerdy with my engineers and trying to figure out a technical solution. Or I get to work with a lot of lawyers because I work in the election space, and just like, or a lot of like government affairs people, and like really figure out like, all right, what are like government people thinking about how Google is like handling election work. So like there's actually a lot of like really interesting intersection here, and happy to talk more about that if you're interested in PM roles. I highly think that like PM roles are great for IR students. And when I say PM, it's not project management, which is what a lot of people think. There are here like program and project managers who are more just tracking what people are doing, and that's very important as well. But those like key differences. And then there's like data scientists. In the IR space, you take a lot of econometrics, right? Or those of you who are taking economics, you can put all those skills into practice, into data science, like being in data science. And there's always QA, which is like you're trying to double check if like the software is working well. So that's kind of more on the technical realm. And a lot of people who get into these roles are non-engineers. Then there's creative, where you have your traditional, like there's marketing, there is kind of like the interface design of like thinking about how things like work. There's user research, which if any of you are in like anthropology or social science, that's like a great entry point for you to think about. Like I know earlier, Ben, you were saying you're taking a lot of this interdisciplinary like humanities classes. Like if you know how to do research and like conduct user interviews, like big tech will give you a lot of money to like help you do those research or to hire you to do that research for them. And then on the business development side, I think here like Tim and Nathan can speak a lot to it. Like there's sales, there's account management, and then there's partnerships, which Tim can like talk more about. Actually, Tim, do you want to like give a one-liner on like what partnerships is?
Like on all tech companies, a lot of things need to work together, right? So talking about Google, talking about Adobe. So a lot of times there's different types of data you need to integrate from other companies or targeting or marketing. So there's a lot of opportunity for, to build what they call partnerships and to put together relationships with different companies. Again, there's a lot of legal involved in that. And then there's managing partnerships. So like somebody asked me like what I do from a day to day. So like I have one partner that's based in Croatia. I have two that are based in London. I have a couple that have South American people that I talk to all the time. So I get a chance to work with people all over the world. Pre-pandemic, I got a chance to go visit them and fly internationally a lot, but now it's mostly over Zoom and Microsoft Teams. But partnerships nobody grows up to say, I want to grow up to be a strategic alliance manager. But for me, it's worked out to be a pretty interesting career so far. I also have been laid off 2 times, maybe 3 times. So it does happen as well. And there's always bends in the road where things go differently.
Yeah, and on the product side, like I work a lot with partnerships, where like we were working on the EU elections earlier this year, and like our partnerships folks like help us interface with the EU Parliament, and so we can talk about how we're building elections for them. So like it's like really like partnerships actually sit at the intersection of a lot of tech roles and then a lot of business roles. And then Nathan, do you want to talk to some of like the operations stuff?
Surely. And I'll add that mostly things on the left, if you haven't already, you could probably hop on youtube.com and just search day in the life of a UX designer at Google, and someone's probably already created some content that you can watch and listen and learn about what their day-to-day like is at probably one of the bigger tech companies. So I am on the operations side of things and sit in procurement, and procurement basically means we help spend the company's money. So at a big company like Adobe or Microsoft or Google, you have teams of engineers, teams of marketers, teams of lawyers, and they all have budgets. They need to spend money on software licenses and things to keep their business running. They're usually not finance people, and they usually do not want to negotiate with sales reps that are trying to sell things to Adobe or to Microsoft. And so procurement is basically an intermediary that steps in and says, hey, marketing team, like, let me know what your budget is, let me know what the contract looks like, and I will talk to the sales rep and make sure you get the best deal possible. And then they're happy because they don't have to deal with those kinds of things, and we're happy because those are usually our skill sets. And one thing I'll say with your majors in this college, I feel like a lot of soft skills, I think, are undervalued now, but so important in your future roles. So know that taking political science classes and learning how to write effectively, communicate effectively is incredibly valuable, especially as a product marketer or someone in sales. So I would say a lot of the skills, I think focus more on the skills that you guys are acquiring in your classes and majors, and know that certainly across all these things, learning how to even develop EQ. I feel like I didn't know what EQ was until I was actually interviewing for a job at Adobe. So EQ, I believe formally stands for emotional quotient, but emotional intelligence. Everyone in this room, I'm sure, is sharp. You're here at BYU. It's an incredible school. There's a very high standard. A lot of tech companies also know that, and so you're applying for jobs where there's also really sharp people, same thing with med school. And so what will help differentiate you is your ability to work and talk to different types of people effectively, resolving conflict, express yourself in a way that makes sense, or pitching a product in a way that makes sense. So again, in your econ classes, poli-sci classes, Latin American study classes, for me, all those skills I think will help set you up in the long run, and I think would be sprinkled throughout every single one of these roles. So don't think the things that you're studying now won't help you down the road. It might not directly be related to your future job in tech if that's where you take it, but I am confident it will help you down the road.
Yeah, I actually noticed that a lot of our, like at Google, a lot of like on the ops side, a lot of our policy, government affairs, and trust and safety people actually came from government or foreign service. And so that's also like another career. Like, so maybe you went and did your government stint and you're interested in transitioning to tech afterwards. That's actually also a very frequent path for some people to go into. So another way to think about a career in tech is also thinking about the focus areas, even if you're like, I don't really know what role I want. We won't go through all of these, but like think about like what are some of the emerging technologies that excite you? What are some of, or maybe you're like, I don't really know about the technologies, but like, how about some of the industries that I really am fascinated with? So for example, some people are like, I feel very passionate about beauty and wellness. Like that's something I like look up a lot in my spare time. Like there are actually a lot of beauty and wellness like startups that have a tech component to it. So like think about it in like different ways like that. Or if you're interested in health, there's a lot of health tech startups. Actually, it's like they love hiring MDs, especially those that like burn out of medical school and decide they don't want to be a doctor. Like actually a lot of them join health tech startups or in health tech investing. And then, or just emerging trends. Like the other day I was at tech conference and there was a woman who was in the State Department for a long time doing cybersecurity, and now she got recruited to do cybersecurity at Bank of America and their tech department. So it's like really interesting. Again, like I think what the three of us are trying to encourage is like not think about binary of like, am I going into law school / government or tech? Like you can always end up in tech in some way, and that's the beauty of being in tech. I won't go through all of these, but yeah, again, think about all the trends that you're interested in reading about in the news and see what's interesting to you. Another way of thinking about getting into tech is to think about what types of companies, or in a way of thinking, it's like, what type of experience do you want to have in tech? So a lot of us are kind of in the more mature kind of company spaces like Adobe, Google, Microsoft. I was at Apple before as well, where like the benefit of working there is there's typically a very mature process of like hiring new grads, and there are pretty like regular quotas of hiring fresh grads, and they have programs to train you and to give you a job like in various roles. So like those are great companies to look at. However, sometimes they're a little bit harder to get into right off the bat. So maybe you want to look at some earlier stage ones, or I started off my career in a startup, and it was so chaotic, so intense, but also like such a great learning experience because you get to kind of touch way more things than you otherwise would have as a fresh grad. You're probably feeling like you're flailing all the time, and there's like less mentoring opportunities for you, but at the same time, like you're just kind of thrown into the deep end. So like again, it's like the type of experience you want to have. Obviously, the pay is going to vary very widely for early stage to fast growing to mature. So again, it's what type of experience you want to have in tech. And then other ways to analyze also when you're thinking about a tech career, are you interested in doing hardware versus software? Software has a much shorter life cycle, so you can learn much quicker, but hardware is a very long life cycle. If you're going to hardware, you better be committed for 2 or 3 years because you want to see something ship out the door. And otherwise, it's hard to speak about your experiences there. That said, hardware is also very rewarding because it's something you can like touch, right? And it gets shipped to market. Other ways to think about, we talk about B2B, which is like business to business, where Tim, like Adobe there's a lot of B2B there, or there's B2C where it's like, hey, the business model is primarily like users buying our product. So like,
Do you want to maybe elaborate B2B versus B2C just in case?
Actually, why don't you do it?
Sure. So B2B stands for business to business. Think Adobe is selling something to Microsoft. B2C would be Adobe selling something to Ben or to Jane. And so there's a lot of people, a lot of groups that want to buy things from a company. So B2B, again, business to business. B2C is usually to people out in the wild.
Yeah. And the reason why it's different, it makes your experience different, is because B2B is kind of more enterprise level. And so maybe there's a lot of emphasis on sales. And whereas like B2C, sometimes you have to move really quickly because, you know, the market's always changing. And so maybe you do more experimentation. So it's like, again, it really shapes the type of experience you're going to have. Also, are you going to go to a space that is more cutting edge of technology, like with generative AI right now? Like, it's a hot space, but everybody, all my friends who are in that space, they're burning out really quickly because everybody's trying to figure out like what's going on, what's our business model. But it's a great opportunity to learn. So again, it's like, what kind of experience do you have? Or maybe you go to a more mature tech company where they know what their business model is, and you're learning more about like, how do I actually function in like the tech world here? So again, that influences it.
If I could just jump in really quickly, I feel like I need to defend us as Kennedy Center students. So I just want to point out that some of my closest friends and housemates when I was an undergrad at BYU, and not disrespecting people that have known for a long time what you want to major in, what your job's going to be after you graduate. One was an accounting major, got his MAC here. One was a finance major. So they I'm going to get an accounting job for EY. I'm going to do this. Like, it was very much planned out. And having been removed from school for 15 years, they are not the happiest. So I think don't be scared that you don't know what your path is going to be. And if you haven't read the book, shout out Wharton School of Business, Think Again by Adam Grant is an incredible book. So I would say as college students, one of the best skills that you can develop right now is just be good at learning, because there's things at Adobe and Microsoft and Apple and Google that we do and sell right now that didn't exist 10 years ago. So just being good at learning and studying and having a passion to learn, I think, will differentiate you from a lot of people. And the last thing I'll say is I often felt when I graduated, I wasn't exceptional at anything. So my finance buddy was great at finance. My accounting friend was great at that. Engineering major was great at that. You may have heard the quote, "A jack of all trades is a master of none." But the back end of that quote that isn't often cited, and I'm paraphrasing, is, "But oftentimes better than a master of one." So I felt like as an IR major, like I'm not great at econ was hard for me. I got a lot of B's and C's in econ. So I wasn't great at econ. I was fine at poli-sci. I enjoyed Latin American studies. So I was pretty good at that. So just being very well-rounded, I think, will set you up for a lot of success in a small, medium, large tech company. And don't be worried if you don't feel like you are exceptional at one thing. And that's, I think, when I worked at this small aerospace company in Springville, the best thing that set me up for success to even get a job and stand out when I interviewed at Adobe was the fact that I was doing so many things, and I can kind of highlight like, oh yeah, I did a lot of budget planning and purchasing and this. So I did 10 things, and you can kind of pick the 2 or 3 that your next job you want asks for in the job responsibilities. You can speak to those things, polish those things, and talk about why you're qualified for that. So I think in the Kennedy Center, you're just exposed to so many different things, and don't view that as a detriment. And as Cece's already pointed out, there's just so many different directions you can go. And I think that is a good thing, as is being well-rounded in this major. And I think I was really worried about that as an undergrad, and I'm so glad that I studied what I studied, looking back on it.
Yeah, I love that. And Nathan and Tim, like any other insights? Yeah, feel free to jump in. I think lastly, like, there's traditional tech companies like the companies we work for, and then there's a lot of mature companies, such as, making this up, but like Bank of America, they have a big cybersecurity unit. So don't, again, limit when you're thinking about tech to just thinking about traditional pure tech companies. Lastly, we'll end on this slide, and then we'll go over to questions. I think there's a lot of factors that people aren't realizing when they're evaluating tech companies. It's not a monolith. Actually, every single tech company is so different. And even especially across big tech, like, the culture is really different. So I think first, like, think about stability. Like, there are some companies that are very early stage in terms of the investment that they're getting. We're calling them like Series A, Series B. These are just rounds of funding that kind of venture capital are giving. So like with the early startups, like I was in a very early startup right out of college. Loved it because like I was managing a ton of people right away, but half the time I was like so stressed because we're trying to fundraise for the next round. Whereas now I'm at Google, and in a way, it's kind of nice. Like, I don't have to worry about the profit and loss in my day to day because, like, we're so shielded a little bit, and I can just focus on, like, what's the right thing to do for democracy, for elections, and that's kind of a luxury in itself. So, like, figure out what level of stability works for you. We talked about the core technology. You have to understand the core technology or at least have an interest in it. Think about the growth. There's a lot of, and think about your growth as well. Like, do you want a company that has a very structured program for fresh grads where they're guiding you through it, or do you want one where they're just throwing you in the deep end? They're both great options, and kind of like what Nathan said, like staying flexible, and I think like being interested in a lot of things is something that IR students are uniquely kind of built to do. Comp and benefits. I don't know, Tim and Nathan, we want to go into this, but I will say, so my little sister went to law school. She doesn't know how much I make. But I think it's like people are often surprised by how well folks in tech are compensated. And it's beyond what you see in Glassdoor. So Glassdoor often kind of only shows like kind of your base, maybe your bonus. But a huge part of tech, especially when you're on the technical ladder, is the like the equity, which is the stocks. And with all three of our companies, like especially in pandemic, like the stocks have just risen like crazy. So like the reason why Silicon Valley or the Bay Area is so expensive is because like you have an average engineer thinking they're making X, but really a huge part of their salary being stocks that has like 4X'd over the last 2 years. So like there's a whole nother component there, and they're giving you stocks every year, so it keeps rolling and rolling until it just kind of snowballs. And so a career in tech could rival in compensation depending on which roles you're in with a doctor, with a lawyer, or maybe even more, and you have the work-life balance to enjoy it. So I think that is like a message that I think a lot of people don't realize. Business model-wise, again, like you gotta feel passionate about the business model. Like, would you personally pay for this? If you're like, I'm going to, I don't know, some health tech company, but you're like, I couldn't care less, then like that's probably not the right company for you. We talked about the type of roles, but also think about within the companies, like, is there good internal mobility? Like, do they encourage you to try different roles? Because that would make a huge difference in figuring out which tech company you want to go into. We mentioned culture. There are some, over lunch, Nathan was joking about how, like, in different big tech companies, they are known for being super ruthless and cutthroat, and they reward that. And then there are other companies, for example, at Google, we have a phrase of, like, are you being googly? Which is essentially like a mix of, like, saying, are you being not only nice, but collaborative, but also, like, you're challenging each other's ideas, so you're not being a doormat. But so, like, there's, like, a whole, like, the culture really emphasizes that, whereas when I was at Apple, the whole premise is like we're all Apple fanboys and fangirls, and we will work over Christmas to get the shipped out the door, and we would be honored to do so. And that's a different level of like, culture too, that like it's really cool to be a part of. So like it just depends on what you want. And then lastly, we talked about the focus areas. So we'll pause here. We just want to create a structure because we know that a lot of people probably don't know enough about tech to even like have questions about it. I don't know if Nathan or Tim, anything else you want to add to this like beginning structure before we open up for questions?
Unless you have geography questions, I've got strong feelings about leaving Provo. I love Provo, but we can get to that if you guys have questions.
Okay, so we'll just stop the slides here and then we'll open up for questions.
Any questions?
I'm curious, you mentioned kind of work-life balance, but also that can depend on the company. Do you find that generally in tech you do kind of have a better work-life balance than you would in other areas, or is it very kind of context dependent based on the role? But you want to take a step?
I guess I'll start. So Adobe, there are definitely, different companies have different cultures or perspectives. And so a lot of people think of it, when they think of a company that really works you to death, is something like Amazon or something where they're very focused on just very small margins. And so shipping and things like that make a big difference. The more mature companies like Adobe specifically has a lot more. Adobe spends a lot of time talking about you can be the person you want to be at work and you don't have to kind of fit into a specific role. So I remember the first time I went to visit our San Francisco Adobe offices at lunchtime. There was a bunch of people having a knitting circle, like they were at lunch, they were doing stuff. And so Adobe is famous for kind of letting people, be who they want to be because it's more of a creative company in a lot of ways. So I did travel a lot in my career. So like my younger children, they're like, why is dad traveling all the time? And then we had pandemic and then I don't travel anymore. So they're like, why doesn't dad take us on fancy trips anymore? So it kind of is, it's an interesting balance of both. But my brother was more on the engineering side at Amazon, and it was super stressful. Like, 'cause something has to ship, you have really hard deadlines. A lot of times in more the business world, the deadlines are more flexible, like targets. Whereas if you're trying to ship a product, you have a very specific date. I also had a really interesting opportunity working with a lot of. I worked in like the speech recognition world for a while, and I worked with a lot of game developers because they wanted to add speech recognition into games. And so a lot of people dreamed about, working, developing a video game or something. And actually that quality of life was the worst I've ever seen out of any companies I worked with. Because if you think about the big video games, they have to ship like before the holiday season or something. And so they get into crunch time and it's not the funnest life. But my life at Adobe's been great. So, but there's definitely, there's different times when it gets crazier and stuff like that. But
I would just add there's company cultures, capital C, and then there's micro cultures within the company. So I worked at Adobe. I have so many great things to say about Adobe, but there might be a team that is kind of known for working over Christmas or whatever. So you can interview advice if you know someone at the company before you apply. Like if you don't have a LinkedIn, set up a LinkedIn or find ways to chat with someone at the company. For me at Microsoft, it was a friend who I knew kind of worked with procurement, and I just asked him, like, what's the reputation procurement has at Microsoft? And he had good things to say about it. Wasn't anything scary. So there's kind of company cultures, which you can usually find on websites like Blind. That's another good one for salaries. There's a few others, but then also like department cultures. So something to think about, but it's a mixed equation. People want to go for culture and they're less concerned about benefits or location, but I'd say that's my experience. Big company culture, and then there's occasional micro cultures that were like, whoa, I didn't know about this.
Yeah, I resonate with that, especially working on elections. Overall, Google, very good with work-life balance. In fact, when I first joined, coming from Apple, I was shocked that everybody's calendars were open to each other. Like, you could see what people were doing, and like, literally, my bosses were putting like, do not schedule from 3 to 4 p.m. because I've got tennis class like during the workday, and I was like, oh my gosh, or we have a lot of actually it's a culture at Google where people are blocking off like, do not schedule time dinner with my kid. Like people are very comfortable and supportive of just like blocking out that family time. At the same time, with the microculture, right? Like I work on elections wait for no one. If there's a fire at work, like I'm on. But I think the thing about tech really, it's less about work-life balance. It's more about like the flexibility is amazing in tech. Like the fact that we're all here on a work day in the afternoon, you're not like quote taking time off work. It's just we're here to volunteer, and that was the end of the conversation. I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, and I actually, again, like I think some traditional roles in other industries, like it's a very strict 9 to 5, or you have to be in the office at a certain time. So I think it's that flexibility that I think I personally really appreciate.
Great question. Other questions?
So how do you leverage your liberal arts careers kind of in getting your foot in the door and then throughout your career as well?
I can take a stab going first. So I would say, again, my liberal arts degree, I think, or just being a BYU graduate, maybe set me apart for the first job that I got. It's a pretty big jump, I would guess, to go straight from BYU undergrad to a job at big tech and think Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Adobe, etc. So that liberal arts degree might help you get the first job you get that's not in tech or in big tech, and then I think from there you'll probably put your skills to practice. So for me, it was learning how to analyze budgets, got that from econ classes, or learning how to communicate myself effectively, and that could be from writing poli-sci papers. So I'd say it's helpful for the first job, and then when you're actually on the job, it's this funny balance if you realize, man, why did I go to college? Like, we didn't do any of these things, but there's so many things that college will have prepared you for, like learning how to manage stress, learning how to work with other people effectively on group projects, learning how to manage your time, learning how to learn. And so I think that's what liberal arts set me up for, was at least getting my first job. And then from there, jack of all trades. Like I probably did 8 things. 5 of them I don't even do anymore in my career, but the 3 things that I did, I took with me to Adobe and learned immensely at Adobe. And then I kind of like was doing 8 things there, and I took those 3 things with me to Microsoft. So I think in your careers, just keep learning. You may think you want to be one thing right now, and 5 years from now, again, back to Think Again by Adam Grant. Like the best thing you can do is just keep reinventing yourself. And I think that's one of the best things you could do in your career.
I would just say, so especially in MBA school, typically people, you go, you get a degree and then you go work somewhere for a while and then you go back to school. But just because of where life was for us, we ended up just going straight to BYU MBA school. So it was actually really hard for me getting my first job out of college. And so what I was really passionate about, something I was really interested in technology back then. And so I was following it, reading about it. And so luckily Dell came to recruit at BYU because Kevin Rollins, just see like the MBA school is named after Kevin Rollins, or part of it is, he was one of the Dell presidents. And so he said, got to come recruit at BYU. And so when the recruiters came to BYU, that was the one thing they said, is that the students here were very enthusiastic and had done the research, versus when they were recruiting at some of the other big schools, they were just like, everybody was just on the calendar. They didn't really do any pre-work when they were coming for the interview. And so that's what kind of set me apart from some of the other people that ended up getting jobs. So it is definitely, I mean, I had international relations. I didn't have like an undergrad in tech or anything, but it was, I was just very passionate about it. And then I found a spot that didn't really require like high tech, a lot of technology background at the beginning, but it was a lot of presenting and marketing and stuff like that.
I think I have a little bit more of a controversial hot take, which is honestly what you major doesn't matter. Like once after your first job, nobody ever asks you what you major in. Like nobody.
Probably just school. Like, oh, like where are you from? Where do you go to school?
Yeah,
Unless your
but
major.
nobody ever asked, or definitely nobody really asked your GPA. So don't stress too much about it. So I think really what I felt like helped me land some of the opportunities I ended up looking into are really the skills that I learned at BYU from doing Model United Nations. It's like really a lot of that like negotiation, consensus building, and then do a ton of internships like in your undergrad. So if you're curious about tech, then like get an internship in tech, or talk to more people in tech. Like, so it's a lot of getting those types of experiences that actually make a difference to get you into your first job, and then from there getting into your second one. It really is not what you majored in. I actually also personally found that TAing really helped me, especially if you have a TA job where you're actually teaching rather than just grading papers, because it's like the ability to, again, like have that presence in front of a room and like answer questions on the fly and like really be able to explain a complicated concept easily. Like those are the skills that will get you anywhere, honestly, in any career, I would assume. So don't overly obsess or feel constrained about what you're studying right now, and focus more on the type of experiences and the skills you want to build to get to where you want to go.
When I was working, I worked with Facebook a lot when they were just getting started, Facebook and Twitter. And those were the companies that really were like, you could only work there if you went to Harvard or somewhere back east. But they didn't care what degree you had. You could be any degree, but they just wanted the smartest people. And it's changed a lot since then, because it's just the markets and everything have changed a lot. But it was interesting where there was kind of this idea that they just wanted the smartest people to come in and try to figure things out. So, but you still see that sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm wondering, so right now the grad fair is going on, and there's a lot of students. It's pretty slim there too, and I feel like there's this narrative that like, should I go to grad school because I'm gonna have to pay so much for it, especially in liberal arts. Like, is it gonna be able to pay off? / is it worth it? Like, what am I gonna learn that's gonna add, or that's not going? So, and I feel like you've got some good experience here this round. So,
Yeah, I'll tell you what BYU's MBA program told me, and then they said, "Now we're good." So I think most MBA students will tell you, and BYU included, if you want to go to grad school, especially an MBA, they'll tell you that the number one reason is probably to pivot So you're a teacher, an engineer, you're doing something else, you want to pivot into business. So that's probably the number one reason they'll tell you to get an MBA at least. Granted, some master's degrees are very specific. If you wanted to get a master's in art and nonprofit, you're probably going to get a job in art and nonprofit when you finish. So pivoting, networking, so tapping into Harvard's network will let you connect with people all over the country. So after you finish, you can probably find a job with someone who also went to Harvard at a company like that. And then the last is skills. So pivoting and networking, I think, are the two big ones. So think if those are important to you, you're ready to pivot, which you're still in school, like work your first job and then decide if you want to pivot first. One thing I'll say, I brought this up at lunch, if you're even remotely considering, a regret of mine, I was working for 4 or 5 years when I was starting to consider MBA school, and I hadn't even taken the GMAT yet. So it was a pain in the butt to decide to study for 3 or 4 hours after work every day. So if you're thinking about med school, law school, MBA school, other programs, take the GRE now, the LSAT now, the GMAT now, because those scores are usually good for 5-ish years. So go work. And then when you're ready to maybe think if you want to go back to grad school, that test is already done. And then from there, it's just applying, submitting, your work experience. So I think grad school can work for some people. I had no idea if I wanted to. I never took the GMAT when I had the time to do so. So that's one thing to consider is if law school is maybe an idea, take the LSAT now. And if you want to go straight away, do it. But if not, you'll have that in your back pocket so you can figure out what schools you can even get into and you don't have to study for the test. But sitting next to 2 MBA students, they may have different perspectives.
I think whether grad school is worth it for you depends on what you want to do. So if you have a very specific idea of what you want to do and that particular grad program is the only way to get there, like going to med school, the only way you're going to be a doctor is to go to med school. And if you know you want to be a doctor, then med school is fantastic for you. I think what I have seen a lot, especially for students going into law school, is a lot of times they think law school is the end in and of itself, which is not true. I have a lot of friends who really enjoyed law school, but realized law as a lifestyle and a career doesn't work for them in the long run, and then pivot out of law, and they're like, oh, why did I go to law school? But law school is also great. A lot of people go from law to something else. And so you have to just understand what you want. And if you don't know what you want, maybe you go to business school. Sorry, I'm just digging at myself. But I think it's really about I will say for me going to business school, I definitely increased my salary by 6 times going there. So was it worth it? It was worth it to me from a financial perspective. It was worth it to me from I would never have ended up in the types of roles I got opportunities for. So it really just depends on figuring out what you want. And if you don't know what you want yet, then maybe maximize for flexibility. What is this grad degree going to give you more options, or is it going to narrow your field of options because you've committed to a path and you've sunk so much money into it? That is the only thing you can really do. So I think it's really about asking yourself that, and it's really hard to answer in a broad stroke of whether it's worth it or not.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's much different. Going to BYU MBA is much cheaper, right? So it's a lot less of an investment. And my wife had graduated, so she was working full time, so she put me through school. So it wasn't as much of a commitment. But I would say too, it was a lot harder for me to get a job coming out of MBA school if I didn't have really good experience, or if you go to a bigger MBA school. We have a daughter that's Harvard Law School right now, so she's in her 3rd year. And it's made a huge difference just because it's just so much easier for her to get interviews. Everybody wants to talk to her versus if you're at a smaller school that's a lot more competitive. That being said, our daughter decided she wanted to do public defense. And so even though she's, spending over $100,000 a year for school, she's not going to make that much money coming out of school. But the nice thing is a lot of schools have programs to help you take care of debt if you're doing public service or something like that. So it's always, so there's some things where I don't know, I guess when we talk to our daughter, it's she's making a bet on her future career. And Harvard just made it easier to, if you decide you don't want to go into corporate law, you can still have a good lifestyle and not have to worry about so much debt.
It's a mixed equation, as they'll tell you, if it's worth it or not.
No.
Question over here?
I didn't have more questions regarding talking about conversational happening or that.
Sure.
It's not only what are some But how do you leverage your years with tech, but then also kind of like your then how that but yeah, seeing seeing yourselves happy stay with each and that you didn't anticipate.
I can go first. So I did a quick search on an AI app. I won't share which one, but liberal arts majors can thrive in big tech by leveraging a range of skills: critical thinking, communication, creativity, adaptability, collaboration. Those are the five that it rattles out. I can't say that because I was a student of the Kennedy Center, I necessarily developed those more fully than someone who majored in something else. Kind of to Cece's point, once you get at your company, people, you don't really ask, like, what'd you study in school or even where'd you go to school? So I think just think of kind of where you went to school as like a qualifier in a way. But once you get your job, they just hire you because you're smart, because they feel like you have these skills. So I can't really say that, like, as an IR major compared to a poli-sci major, I stand out more at work, because just think of your classmates. You all have different individual gifts and talents and skills. So it's the same when you get to work. Like, some people are really good organizers, some people are good critical thinkers, some people are good public speakers. So I think really just your individual gifts and talents will carry you forward in your career more than the classes you took in your major. That's just my perspective.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, like, those of you who have studied econ, it's all about your unique competitive advantage, right? And it's about basically like, what is the thing that makes you really special? And again, that has nothing to do with your major, really. And like, for example, as a product manager, there are so many different types of product managers and different like ways of doing product management. Like my unique, kind of ability is like when things are so chaotic and ambiguous and people are like freaking out for whatever reason, like that's my calmest moment. It's really easy for me to see the next steps. And also, like, I'm really good at building relationships. But maybe another product manager, like their unique skill set is they're really, really good at drilling into the data analysis, and they can like really tell a story with data. Or some people who transitioned over from being a software engineer, like they're very techy and they could get into like the tech stack and like really talk about technical details. So again, like I think it's about figuring out what your unique competitive advantage is, and then figuring out one of those roles that would maximize the opportunities for you to shine, rather than, once again, like trying to like fit into, there's no one right way. Even with these roles, there's no one right way to do it. Which is all to say everybody can be successful. I think like what we're trying to say is that no matter what your path is, no matter what you're studying, everybody can be successful in tech, and there's probably a really good spot for you, like regardless of what you want to do. So
I know we're almost at time, but I would just say too, it's been a little bit interesting. Some tech companies are kind of hard drinking cultures where there's a lot of stuff that happens like at happy hour after, or going to conferences and stuff like that. And so that's one thing I think that's been a little bit unique about coming from BYU. There's a lot of expectations about what are you going to be, how are you different, and stuff like that. And so I know my first job, we would have happy hour a lot, and I had to take shots of salsa instead of alcohol, just because they wanted me to participate. And then the more I got into my career, a lot of times I just felt different, right? Because I'm from Utah and I don't drink, or I don't drink coffee. But I ended up working with a lot of different people around the world, and so like I had a lot of people that were Jewish, and so sometimes they would make fun of me for not drinking alcohol, and I'd be like, "Well, can you have a cheeseburger or bacon?" And they're like, "No." So everybody's got their own kind of unique things that they do, and so that's one of the things I've loved most about my job, is just getting the chance to meet people all over in different situations and recognize. I think it's true. It's a lot more about who you are as a person than what your job, what your school was, and your grades and things like that. So
There's probably a chance for one more question. If not, we can finish with our testimonies.
Your testimony
About tech.
About tech. The thing I was going to say earlier about geography, unless there's no question, the motto of BYU is enter to learn, go forth to serve. It's not lost on us the irony that at present, the three of us currently live in Utah right now, but I think we would each sing the praises of leaving the state. And there are some good tech companies here, small, medium-sized. Adobe's a Fortune 500 company. If I was in your shoes, I regret not seeking out internship opportunities other places. And I spent a summer in Nicaragua, which is awesome, with a nonprofit. That was probably one of the favorite parts of my BYU career, but I wasn't good at like spending a summer in a place out of state because opportunity costs, like, oh, like most of my friends are here, or like I don't know people there. The internet has flattened the world. There are so many incredible cities. So just as you think about internships and your jobs, moving to Silicon Valley blessed my life in ways that I can't really describe. And that could be the same for you in your careers, whatever path you go. Just have the courage. And if you stay here, that's fine. I'm just saying there's so many incredibly dope, dynamic places where there's members of the church that you move to. Like, yeah, all the places we lived, Austin, in the Bay, like there's tons of BYU grads all over the world. So just have the courage to spread your wings and fly. And I think you'll make relationships and just like raise the ceiling of what your earning potential could be, what your skills can be, how you view the world. Like, I think Tim's point is spot on. Like, I think we're a pretty peculiar people, and you'll be able to elevate others by being different and being in those places. A little bit hard to do that here, but people have very happy and blessed careers here. But just don't sell yourself short by not having the courage to move to Philly or Austin or wherever. It's a pretty amazing BYU network and Kennedy Center network. So
I think one last thing I'll end on is like, if there's something that scares you but really excites you and you can't get it out of your mind, then that probably is a good sign that you're probably supposed to do it. So whether, I know we talked a lot about tech today, but it could be like going to foreign service or anything you want to do. Like all of us, when we were in your shoes at BYU, there's no way we would have predicted the careers we ended up having. And it's all about, it's a constant story of you're pivoting, you're trying new things, you're failing, and then you're finding something else that you liked better. And so like, I think it's more about just taking that first step. So something that you're like, ooh, that would be really cool, but I don't think I am qualified for it. Especially, I'll just speak quickly to the women in the room. Like there's a lot of research that shows that like women will only apply to something if they're like almost like line by line qualified for this in their job description, and men would just go for it, you know? So like most of the roles that I applied for, if I'm just looking at the job description, I am not qualified. But when I interviewed and when I got the job, I was probably like, you know, rocking it. And so like a lot of times when you look at these JDs and a lot of them say, oh yeah, you should have a degree in computer science, or you should have a degree or like tech related experience, just ignore that. Just be like, this is the role I want. I'm just going to apply for it. What's the worst they're going to do? They're going to say no, and then I'll just go move on to the next one. But like, it's more about you don't get what you don't ask for. So just ask and just go put yourself out there, and you're going to turn out loving where your life leads. And that's like probably the best advice I could share.
Okay. So, small but mighty, hand forward. Thanks for being here. Thanks for putting this together. And yeah, and these are really cool for your willingness to do that. And thank them.
We're happy to have this question with you about all work and like we need to come to this and to this year. Like it's you grasp get into tech.